I was just watching Isle of Dogs by Wes Anderson, and I had put off watching it for a long time simply because, like, even though people say Wes Anderson's animated films are cute, to be honest, I find, to me, all of his puppets look a little creepy and kind of sketchy, and I don't really like them. But, I was enjoying Isle of Dogs until I kind of noticed that it's a little bit, like, I'm going to be a bit rude and use the word racist. Because basically, um, just about all of the evil or bad characters in the film are Japanese speakers, and the only character they show as being a good person is this frustratingly woke Cincinnati girl, and it was just yeah, a bit racist and a bit annoying that way. Some people have accused the film of only showing a fantasy Japan, which is kind of true. It's not a secret that the city the film talks about is obviously fantasy, but it has to be noted that it's not meant to be contemporary Japan either. It is meant to be not only a fantasy Japan, but they seem to call on a lot of tropes and culture from the Showa period of Japan, perhaps early to mid Showa, and that surprised me. Actually, I was pleasantly surprised at the amount of research that the filmmakers seemed to have put into putting Isle of Dogs together. That much was impressive. However, it was clear that the Japanese government was being used as a generalized allegory for racial inequality, for inequality in status, which wouldn't be an unfair accusation to make of Japan in some ways, because the way that they handle the homeless in Japan is not great. I mean, it's not great in any country, but in Japan there is a bit more bias against the homeless than you might see in a country like America, or Australia for that matter. Um, Although over time that does seem to be going away, which is wonderful. But it has to be noted that Wes Anderson's film is from 2018, so it's not exactly recent. It's not that old, but I think Wes Anderson himself is too old to tell a story in our times. In that using a faux foreign government as an allegory for your own was acceptable back in times when I would say countries' relationships were less direct. Maybe 20 years ago, before the advent of social media, or the popularization of it, it was fair enough to do something like this because we could think of a foreign country as being somewhat fantastical since we didn't have personal access to it so easily. But now that there's cheaper airfares, now that it's so easy to actually speak and communicate directly with Japanese people through the internet, it's not acceptable anymore. It's not acceptable to do this because it ends up, instead of being a legitimate criticism of your own government, to being something that these people will probably see and misinterpret as a criticism of their country. And while, as I said, the way the homeless are handled in Japan isn't always great, there is something a bit wrong, I think, about being so critical of another country when the problems of your own country haven't been fully resolved yet. It's a little bit like throwing stones when you're living in a glass house. It something about it just doesn't smell right, so to speak, and it ends up coming off as unfortunately racist. Sorry, I'm having trouble positioning. Oh, sorry, there we go. Um, and yeah, it was a little distressing that all of the good dog characters were able to speak in English, were perfectly understandable. Again, the fact that it's very rarely that Japanese speaking characters in the film were translated, that was sort of othering. It was also sort of othering that the main character, the main human character, the little boy, he wears geta throughout the film, metal geta, even though by that time, I'm pretty sure even basic sneakers were commonplace in Japan. I believe. And so it again, maybe they were trying to give it more of a Showa period feel, and in the Showa period, wearing geta was a bit more, like, much more common than it is now. But given that he's a mayor's ward, living in an urban setting rather than having, if he had come directly from the country, that would have been more understandable. But the fact that he hadn't, that he had come from a metropolis, uh, again, not quite right, in my opinion. Uh, but even as I say this, I think it's worth noting that we can sit and be critical of attempts at engaging with other cultures. Uh, you know, when in truth we are sort of privileged. People in my generation and younger have grown up in the information age. We've had the advantage of being able to access information on Japan or any other country almost completely freely as much as we want. People in the generation of Wes Anderson, however, did not grow up with those advantages. So to find them being culturally ignorant is not a shouldn't be surprising, and to find them displaying real effort towards cultural knowledge and understanding should actually be applauded. I feel, because for them it would have simply been harder, and it is harder. And so when they do take the time to research something as well as it would take to make something like Isle of the Dogs, it is sort of impressive. But at the same time, I found myself thinking, why can't we just let Japanese people make stories about Japan? Why can't we just watch their movies if we want a movie set in Japan? Why do we in the West have to set a movie in Japan, in order to tell a Japanese story, as though we can't just watch their films themselves, we need to make our own? But again, it has to be remembered that Wes Anderson comes from a time when accessing films from Japan was much harder than it is today, and you know was simply less often done because and even once they had access to it, it was harder for them to understand the stories as intended, because again they lacked the information and context necessary to understand what they were seeing rightly. And so it's this sort of awkward thing where I sort of regard Wes Anderson as being a relic of an earlier period, as a filmmaker, but at the same time, with as far as being a relic is concerned, he has tried to be a very good one. And I do respect him for that much, even if I do sort of wish he had done a bit more homework, just a bit more. Maybe yeah, or not even just did his own homework. But what if he had actually worked with more actual Japanese people to make the film if he really wanted to? What if he had worked with real Japanese visual directors? I mean, he did get some real Japanese people to be part of the voice cast, but I feel like he could have done more, perhaps. But that's another thing. I find that Western people are sometimes a bit wary of working with Asian people because I think they wrongly or unjustly assume that the cultural disparities will be so great that they won't be able to work together as a team, which, isn't necessarily true either. Um, but yeah, that's my verdict on Isle of the Dogs. I'm not trying to tell you whether or not to see it. I think if you really love dogs and you really love Showa period Japan, you might get a bit of a kick out of it. Um, if you like dog puppets that kind of look vaguely like just scraggly and sort of feral, then it's a great movie for you. Um, but yeah, if you're wanting a non-challenging, easily viewed movie, might not be such a great option for you. You might have to, yeah, just, yeah, if you are wanting to watch a movie about Japan, why not just get a movie about Japan, If you are wanting to watch a movie where Japan is being used as a thinly veiled um, allegory for the American government, then sure, you'll have a great time.